Hello everyone, I'd like to talk about an alternate history I've come up with where Bunzilla, a company selling banh mi's, is the primary or major fast food store in the world, and the way that this came about. So I'll start with why fast food chains emerged in such a big way in the first place in the 20th century, what the point of divergence was which caused this change, why Bunzilla grew so well in this timeline, uh, the effect that this had on the world around surrounding it, and then why I find this most interesting. Why I find this interesting. So throughout all of human history, there's been a tremendous demand for foods which were cheap, protein-rich, meat-heavy, highly palatable, and quickly prepared by someone else for you whenever you want it. This demand, combined with increased urbanization, car ownership, interstate highways, the tourism car journeys enabled by the above factors, wealth, and time-poor lifestyles, led to the development and growth of fast food outlets. Among the most successful of these companies in our timeline is McDonald's and Subway, which approximately have 36,000 and 38,000 stores globally, respectively. McDonald's 36, Subway 38,000. So these fast food store outlets, which use the assembly line model of production, are mostly standardized product with small regional variations, and a large base of franchisees who want to open their own business with a ready-made market, who will then go on to earn money for this for the franchisee as well. These companies which have these qualities do well in our timeline, and maybe in general do well. So in this timeline, the Bahn Mi, a delicious, in my personal opinion, Vietnamese lunch, becomes the standard international cuisine rather than the burger or the sandwich. So the point of divergence in this timeline, which causes this to occur, is that John F. Kennedy passes the Immigration and Nationality Act in 1961, which abolishes the system of national origin quotas, rather than Lyndon B. Johnson doing so in 1965, as happened in our timeline. This act is also broader than it was in our timeline, reducing the ban on quote-unquote sexual deviants entering the United States, and providing a path to citizenship and permanent residency for people who fought for the United States overseas, and giving priority refugee status to people affected by wars America fought in overseas. So the effects of this is that there's a much larger amount of people from Vietnam, particularly South Vietnam, as they were the ones mostly fighting for the United States, entering the United States in the aftermath of this act and over the following years, until America eventually lost in Vietnam. So this migration policy would reduce accusations of racism on the United States by the Soviet Union, and put pressure on other Western countries to adopt similar policies, loosening their border restrictions based on explicitly racist ideas or implicitly racist ideas. So this different migration status quo would lead to the development of fiercely capitalistic Vietnamese American communities growing rapidly in the United States in the early 1960s. These communities brought over the technique for production of this cuisine and a desire to do well for their families and communities in the American capitalistic system. One company which did particularly well in this timeline is Bahn Feast, later renamed Bunzilla for branding and logo purposes, so as to associate itself with the Godzilla movies, which in this timeline are in 2008, which in this timeline are as big as the Marvel comic universe in our timeline. Three main reasons why it outcompeted its competitors in this timeline were because of its role as a transport company, its use of Vietnam's national PR campaign, and as I'll talk about first, its similar beneficial qualities as hamburgers and sandwiches. So banh mi's as a food item have similar beneficial qualities as hamburgers and sandwiches, which grew quickly in our timeline, as banh mi's can be made cheaply, are protein-rich, meat-heavy, highly palatable, and can be quickly prepared by someone else for you whenever you want it, using the assembly line model of production. Secondly, there was established policy and practice for the company to allow people without access to cars and or who didn't want to take a bus to order banh mi and hitch a lift with a delivery driver. Over time, an emotional connection and cultural norm towards this type of behaviour developed, and it became a trope in advertising, TV, and more or less a cultural norm, with banh mi's often being stored and eaten as lunch by the children of the people taking the lift. So this was beneficial to the people taking the lift, as it was cheaper than taxis, and basically helped make life easier for a lot of low-income people in this timeline. Secondly, it was the corporate office also used a variety. The corporate office also used a variety of means of what is best described as legal fuckery to slow down other companies doing the same thing, and after being able to do so for 5 years, more or less set a captive market. Other companies did the same thing, but it was in less ways and less fashionable and less adopted, basically. So thirdly, it gained significant prominence in this timeline because it was able to successfully leverage Vietnam 2011 primary massive PR campaign to gain the certainty of economic support so as to borrow large sums of money and expand. PR campaigns of this sort occur in our timeline as well, as was seen with Thailand's Global Thai program, which aimed to boost the number of Thai restaurants around globally as a means of gastro-diplomacy. This remarkable growth of banh mi as a food staple has had a number of effects on the world in this timeline, primarily in that there would be an earlier and greater growth of factory farming of pigs and less growth of cattle farming. This would have a number of interesting effects. Firstly, there would not be as much democratization of beef as a meal for the middle and lower class as occurred in our timeline, and steaks and beef would be seen as more of a meal for the upper class, or to consume only on special occasions. Pork is 4 times as energy efficient as beef to produce, and releases slightly less than half as much carbon dioxide. So in this timeline, there would be greater quantity of either grain or meat available to the people who wanted it, and there will be less focus on reducing the number and emissions of cattle in order to slow down and manage global heating. Secondly, the growth of pork farming would affect politics by influencing where demographics are concentrated, where business opportunities begin or open up, and the incentives of politicians based on this different reality. Banh mi would have comparatively less meat than burgers. So it's likely that there would be smaller global numbers of livestock kept, and the problem of feral pigs on native wildlife and the agricultural sector would be larger and more prevalent in people's minds in this timeline. So why do I find this topic interesting in the first place? So this alternate history concept is interesting to me because I first off love banh mi's in my life. Additionally, interesting things about the alternate history genre to me are how economics, politics, religion, and various other factors affect culture and society today. Alternate histories in our timeline often focus on the outcome of wars to change history. This is definitely important, but I think just as often other events can change the world in stranger, but sometimes even more radical ways. Thank you for listening. I'll see you later. Hopefully I didn't speak too quickly.